From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
So, scrofula. What be thee, you might
AKA
ask?
the scruff.
Or the king's evil. Well, it's pretty cool to look into it because it's actually a really early version of, perhaps, marketing. Hey, Edward Bernays wasn't involved this time.
You know, I'm so glad that you said that, Matt. And a little piece of me hopes that Bernays was at least aware of this brilliant con. And I'll call it a con. This may be a controversial episode.
Hey, yeah.
Shoot me.
Rim shot.
But, yeah. So you're right. They focused on this specific thing, this specific condition. Its dressed up name when it goes to fancy parties is tuberculosis cervical lymphadenitis, the king's evil, as we said. The thing about this condition, tuberculosis cervical lymphadenitis, if you want to search it to your heart's content, is that you'll find it rarely leads to death. And it often, even back then, would go into remission seemingly on its own. So, and this is very important later, the royal touch appeared to cure the condition. Unlike paralysis or blindness, conditions that could be easily discerned just from looking at someone, this was something that, you know, the person who is suffering from the affliction would be the most aware of. And that's why the royal touch looked like it worked, or just as importantly, it looked like it didn't fail.
But like, are these symptoms that were so pronounced that it could be super clear that like, haha, and your symptoms have now left you entirely? Or was it so subtle that, well, it worked eventually? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, did there need to be a big aha moment? Or was it like, okay, now go home and get some rest and call me in the morning kind of situation? It seems a little more like that. And then they would report back, I'm cured. And then the king's touch was a smashing success or thought of as infallible. Is that kind of the shape of it, Ben?
The big physical indication, the most apparent physical symptom is swelling of one or more lymph nodes. So swelling would go up and then it would gradually go down. And some people who had pre-existing or concurrent unrelated conditions would also have things like fever, weight loss, fatigue, night sweats. In other words, a bevy of symptoms that could come from any number of ailments. Mm-hmm. So, worst comes to worst, if the king's touch has not cured someone of the king's evil, they can always say that they cured that one specific thing, the king's evil, and what's really getting you is leprosy. Yeah. We're not praying hard enough.
Yeah, well, let's not forget, too, this was a time of very poor medical care. So a lot of people were sick a lot of the time, I would imagine, you know?
Yeah. Hey, guys, I just thought of something outside of the healing, just to take a quick detour here. We're talking about the king's touch or the queen's touch or the physical act of someone in royalty touching another person. Connecting that to ordainment, I was thinking about being knighted or taking up something like that, where you're using a physical thing, a sword, in a lot of cases, some kind of weapon to touch another to then send the powers that you already have into that other person.
That's right.
Yeah, and symbolically show that you are the difference between their life and their death. Not for nothing is it a sword.
That's right.
So the weird thing is this sounds like an historical footnote, right? One of those other kind of obscure things that are fun to hear about. The last known example of the royal touch occurred as recently as 1825 at the coronation of the French King Charles X. And then after that, these superpowers of monarchy sort of fade away. Mm-hmm. And it's good to know that they faded away if you're a fan of medicine. But if you're a fan of folklore, it's a little bittersweet to see them go. You know, they went the way of the dodo, along with other royal superpowers like the ability to craft magical curative objects, or of course, the ability to exorcise demons, because you see, science becomes the new kid in town.
Well, yeah, but even like things like we've talked about previously, like unicorn horns being ground up, or like what they thought were unicorn horns, which are actually like narwhal tusks that were traded by the Vikings. That was something that even the royals believed in, pretty heavily, and they would have like scepters made out of these things and these like magical objects, which is interesting to me because if there was this emphasis on the royal touch being so powerful, how come they couldn't use it on themselves?
It's a good question.
Interesting.
That was probably the moment in court where a philosopher got kicked out.
Oh, we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear any of that. And exactly. But then, thankfully, science did sort of supplant a lot of this stuff. So, what does science have to say about this whole concept of imparting power or healing to others just through physical touch?
Well, I mean, the scientific community in the modern day largely, vast majorityly dismisses faith healing as being a thing. They say that it's pseudoscience. I mean that's just kind of the stance, right? That's the way it's going to be, and in the way it has been for quite a long time. But there are many others in the world, from true believers to people who are even more skeptical. They do object to this concept of it being complete pseudoscience. There are people, I would say, kind of like me. I don't want to put myself too deep into this camp early on in this episode, who think there might be something to it, to that physical connection of cells, atoms together that could do something, right? And people who believe this a little more, they argue that faith healing should be viewed as a spiritual practice in itself, and that is it. It is a spiritual practice, right? Mm-hmm. And the concept of using faith healing or believing in faith healing or accepting faith healing has nothing to do with science and scientific claims. It should be treated as a matter of faith, and that's it, period. Mm-hmm. But it's no surprise that this practice is still really popular, and there are things that have grown out of it. Different kinds of faith, different kinds of touching or almost touching. I'm thinking about Reiki, where there's almost touching. It's the same kind of physical act without the physical touch. There's all kinds of interesting.
Or think about this. I'm a televangelist. Put your hand against the screen.
Especially
Pray
in the
with
time
me,
of Corona.
and you will be healed. That's for that's for folks watching the video there.
Oh man, I felt it hard, man.